Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Etienne, as Dan has just introduced. I'm a geologist. I work locally in the oil industry, but this is my hobby, my passion, a bit of fun that I do in my spare time. So what I want to do today is tell you a little bit about the fossils that we can find in and around the Abingdon area. I've lived here for about 18 or 19 years. But it's only been in the last 5 years that I started collecting locally, and really as a result of COVID. During the 1 hour we were allowed out a day during lockdown, I took the dog for a walk and I tried every path in Abingdon that I could possibly try, and found an ichthyosaur vertebra at the side of the path near one of the local gravel pits, which piqued my interest as I'd cycled past these pits for years. Going to work in Milton Park, and always thought I should really go in there and have a look and find out what kind of stuff is in there. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey. So we'll start by setting the scene. So 150 million years ago, this area was covered by an ancient seaway, and I'll show you a map of it in just a minute. So this is during the late Jurassic. At the same time as this, we've actually got dinosaurs roaming the land nearby in the London area to the east of us, and it was home to monsters. And I'll tell you a little bit about why that is. Why monsters? Well, the old quarrymen used to collect, or used to find, a lot of big bones when they were digging the sand and gravel resources around this area. So they named it, or coined it, the monster beds. But it's not just because they were finding big bones. A lot of the bones that we find here are some of the biggest of their kind for their respective animals known anywhere in the world. The biggest turtle, the biggest pliosaurs, some of the biggest pterosaurs, and others. So what did Britain look like 150 million years ago? Well, it looked like this. And you probably don't recognize that at all. But if we look at this map on the right here, you can see the coastline, the modern coastline here. So we had a land mass to the east of us around London, the London platform. There was a little land mass in Wales and Cornubia, Cornwall. But there was a seaway running all the way through here. And we're somewhere around in this area here in the Cotswolds, Wealden Shelf. So 150 million years ago, there was sea running right through where we are today. And that's important. We know that because we've got lots of marine fossils, and we'll talk about what some of those fossils are. So you're here in the basement right now. What's beneath your feet? So if you were to rip up the floor here and start digging straight down, after getting through some pretty interesting archaeology that Jeff can tell you all about, you would quite quickly get into the youngest terrace of the Thames, the Northmoor Gravels, which is one of about 9 different terraces that show the down cutting of the River Thames, the Paleo Thames, from about 200 meters above sea level to where we are today, at just a few meters above sea level. And those gravels contain evidence of both Neolithic and Paleolithic stone tools. And I've got a tool here. I'm going to pass it around. I don't know if the light's good enough, but hopefully you can have a look at it and see it. These things are really beautiful. They're flaked stone tools, and they're quite unusual. They do occur. These are the only 3 that I've collected in 5 years. This one is Neanderthal, this one maybe, and this one is Paleolithic, probably about 400,000 years old, or Jeff can correct me on that afterwards. So in addition to these stone tools, we also see Pleistocene mammalian megafauna. So these are things like woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, steppe bison and others. And we find remnants of those too. And this is part of a tusk that I found, a tooth from a woolly mammoth. And there are some specimens upstairs, like the femur of a woolly rhinoceros and teeth and things like that, which we can also find. So these are relatively young, and some of them may even be reworked from older terraces in the Northmoor gravels. If you carried on digging through the gravels, you would find that most of the Tertiary and Cretaceous is completely missing here. So there's a big unconformity, a big time gap. We go from these very young gravels, 126,000 years or younger, into Jurassic rocks of the Kimmeridge Clay Formation, which are about 150 million years old. And this is what they look like. So we have the terrace gravels here. We can see things like cross-bedding, which indicates migrating channel bars and things in the fluvial system. And it sits abruptly on top of this dark grey blue clay of the Kimmeridge clay. So this represents a time gap of about 150 million years in the geological record. So in here we get stone tools, we get the mammalian megafauna that I was talking about, and in here this is where we get all our marine fossils and the fossils of these big marine reptiles and things. So these gravels have been quarried in this area since, well, at least the 1980s, probably earlier. Some of you may know the marina development here on the south end of town, but you can see there's several lakes here. All of these lakes represent former gravel pits where the sand and gravel has been excavated for commercial construction materials. And there's also a lot of backfilled land in here. So this whole area pretty much has been worked. And over the last 5 years, the last remaining pits have pretty much been worked out. So most of them are now flooded or backfilled. And there's barely anything left to look at, unfortunately. It's a real shame after collecting for the last 5 years that they're running out. But these pits, when they get through the gravel, they go into the Kimmeridge clay. And the Kimmeridge clay is named after Kimmeridge Bay in Dorset, and trends all the way across Britain, up through the Wash, and comes out in the Cleveland Basin. And that sort of mirrors that seaway map that I showed you earlier. And of course, there's nothing here because this was land. But we obviously have dinosaurs roaming this area. And you can see that Abingdon, this purple colour on the map here, is completely underlain by Kimmeridge clay. So it's a really important inland location for finding fossils of this particular age, because other than some other pits that used to exist around Swindon and other areas, most of them have now gone. So in the last 5 years, I've been collecting from the quarry yard here, where they process the material that's been extracted, and principally from 2 pits around an old reservoir here and a new pit that was opened up a couple of years ago here. Pit number 1 was already significantly underway in terms of backfilling when I started collecting, but I did find some material just around the edges where the clay was still exposed. But from this, I found an astonishing array of things that you would see: fish, sharks, turtle, crocodiles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, dinosaur bones, pterosaur bones. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in the next few slides. So specifically, for any of you that really want to get into the details of the geology, we're in the Kimmeridge clay. The Kimmeridge clay itself is both Kimmeridgian and Tithonian in age. These are detailed breakdown of the ages of late Jurassic rocks. And the section that's exposed most frequently is right around the Kimmeridgian-Tithonian boundary. So we know the age, and we know the age very well because these clays are full of ammonite fossils. Ammonites are important for correlating rocks, and where we have means of dating them, they also allow us to calibrate the geological age. So here we have pectinatites ammonites on the left. These small ones and they're about this sort of size in real life, are the male of the species, and the much bigger ones, and they get this sort of size, are the female. And then this ammonite here is called Gravesia, and Gravesia is very diagnostic of a very specific interval of time. So when we see these two together, we know exactly where we are in the geological record. This is an ichthyosaur rib here, just for comparison. So I'm going to talk you through some of the fossils that we find and what they represent, just to give you an idea of the diversity of what we see in the Kimmeridge clay here. So the first is a group of fish called Chimera. Chimera represented by at least 3 different species, genera and species that have been collected here: Ischiodus, Brachymylus, and Elasmodectes. And these are just bits of the jaw parts. These are cartilaginous fish, like sharks, so the cartilage doesn't really preserve very well, and therefore is very rarely fossilized. But the mouth parts, the teeth, these grinding plates, do tend to get preserved. So modern examples would be things like spookfish, ghostfish, elephantfish, ratfish, rabbitfish, weird names. But they were basically bottom feeders in dark, sort of muddy, deep water, 200 meters water depth up to maybe 2 kilometers water depth. We certainly aren't in 2 kilometers of water depth, but we probably are in 200 meters water depth in this area. And you can see the size of them compared to a human fish, about this sort of size, swimming around the bottom. We also get these things called Gyrodus. Gyrodus are moonfish, and they got pretty big. Now, most Gyrodus specimens, this again is a crushing plate from the mouth. Most of these things tend to be about this sort of size. This particular specimen is about this big. So it came from a pretty big fish. And we're talking a fish this sort of size, okay? So big moonfish, and an unusually large dentary from that specific fish. Maybe one of the biggest that's been found in the Jurassic in the UK. So this fish lived in open marine conditions. So again, we're still in sort of relatively deep, temperate water off the western margin of that landmass, the London Brabant landmass. We also find tooth plates from other bony fish like Lepidotes or Sheensteer maximus, as it's now called. These are 2 plates that I found this year. They're very rare and very unusual to find at this sort of size. This is a spectacularly big example, probably the biggest from the British Jurassic anywhere ever found in the last 200 years. This is a set of scales. It's quite a bony fish, had hard armor on its exterior. And these were collected by somebody else, Paul Oldfield, I believe, sometime back in the 1980s. And this is an example of what a complete fish would have looked like. This one is not from here, this is from Germany. But I wanted to give you an example of something that's complete, so you could get a sense of what it looks like. And if you want to see some really spectacular examples, I strongly recommend that you go and visit the Museum for Jurassic Marine Life in Kimmeridge in Dorset, which houses the spectacular Etches collection, where Steve Etches has been digging up fossil fish and preparing them for the last 30, 40 years. It's probably one of the best collections in the world of Kimmeridge material. We also see sharks. We see sharks from a number of different things. Again, they have a cartilagen-based skeleton, so very rare that you find bits of the vertebrae or ribs or anything like that. But we do find their fin spines, and this one is Astracanthus ornatissimus, and the other one is this Planahibidus. They're given completely different genera and species names, but they may actually belong to the same shark. But we rarely find them fossilized together, so we don't actually know. So this one, maybe this one, That one might be this one. And these vertebrae might also belong to it. And they're all got different names, but they're probably all part of the same kind of shark. We also very rarely find turtle material. This is from a paper that was published by Perez Garcia, 2015, I think. And this is the specimen of the largest known turtle that's been found from the Kimmeridge clay. And it comes from Thrupp, so it's quite local, still in the Abingdon area. A specimen about this big, you can see it's completely crushed into a million pieces, but it sits in the Oxford Museum and still represents the largest known turtle of its age from the Jurassic in Britain and from this area. This is a specimen of a plate, a part of the bony shell that I found here in Abingdon, and a reconstruction of what this thing might look like. So this one probably lived much more closer to surface in the photic zone, maybe a little bit more near to the shore. And maybe that's why it's so rare. Maybe we're only finding fragments of things that have died in shallower water and then been washed out into the deep. So this is what it's like. I spend my time grubbing around in mud, in wet conditions, getting absolutely caked in it. Sometimes it gets so heavy you can barely lift your feet off the floor because you're standing 2 inches higher in mud. Finding here an ichthyosaur vertebra, and ichthyosaur bones are actually very common. I've got a vertebra here you pass around and have a look at, and I've probably collected I'd say maybe 1,000 or 2,000 of these over the last 5 years, so they're very common. But one individual may have 140 vertebrae in its backbone, potentially more. So they're fairly common. But associated material is very rare, and by far the best remains one that Jeff, sat in the audience here, found back in the 80s. And you can see that the original skeleton here was scattered. It's not articulated in the way that it lived. So the bones have all been sort of washed about a bit and scavenged. And this specimen is in the display case upstairs as part of the permanent collection, and has been studied quite a lot over the last couple of years. I believe a new paper will be published soon which summarizes the details of this specimen compared with other ophthalmosaurs of this kind of age from the Kimmeridge clay. But in terms of preservation, we find pretty much everything from these animals. We find their jaws, we find their skulls, we find their backbone, we find their paddles, their limbs, their ribs. But the thing that we barely ever find is their teeth, which is really weird. I think there are a few teeth associated with this skeleton, but in 5 years, this is the only piece of jaw that I've found that contains teeth. And the reason for that is that they don't grow out of the bone. They're not sort of rooted in the bone. The teeth actually sat in soft flesh like polyps, just sat in grooves. So the minute they died and that flesh rotted away, the teeth all just fell out and got washed away. So teeth are extremely rare. And that's why you see things like this specimen that was collected by Steve Etches back in the 80s, with absolutely no teeth. It looks very strange, because if you see any examples from southern Britain, from Dorset, all these spectacular specimens that Mary Anning found from the early Jurassic, all got tight interlocking teeth and look really incredible. Most of the skeletons we find are scattered, they're scavenged, they've been eaten. This is a partial skeleton from an ichthyosaur that I found scattered over several square meters. And you can see all the bones are broken. And they've all been bitten off, the ends are chewed, and you can actually see microbial degradation on the bone where the ends have been bitten. So you can tell some really nice stories with this. And actually, if we rearrange this particular specimen, you can see how the bite mark traces across the rib cage. So that's quite cool. I'm sorry, I forgot to put that picture in the presentation. In addition to ichthyosaurs, we also see crocodilomorphs. Now, these aren't crocodiles the way you know them, but they've got the same kind of body shape as crocodiles, but they have paddles. And we find examples of both teleosaurids and metrorhynchids, so two different clades. But they didn't have, most of these didn't have hard bony armor like you see in modern crocodiles. So scutes like that are extremely rare. But this is a limb bone from something called Dacosaurus, which was a pretty big crocodilomorph. If it was in this room, it would probably lay out most of the length of the floor here. So a pretty big thing. You wouldn't want to go anywhere near it. It would definitely be able to bite your whole leg off in one bite. We do find examples with teeth and rarely also vertebrae. Remember I told you with the ichthyosaur example, I've collected maybe a couple of thousand of those vertebrae. I think I've found 10 in 5 years of hunting from crocodilomorphs, so they're extremely rare. But this is kind of what they look like. So ichthyosaurs here, to give you a sense of what they look like in real life. Ichthyosaurs had very big eyes. In fact, the biggest eyes of any animal that ever lived on Earth. In the most biggest examples, their eyeballs were literally the size of footballs. So they got really big. And we know quite a lot about them. They've been heavily studied. We know that, for example, they had counter shading with a dark back and a light belly like modern sharks. They gave birth to live young, and we know that because there are spectacular fossils in Germany from Solnhofen, for example, where you see the fetus halfway through birth, fossilized inside the mother, some catastrophic event that killed them both instantly and preserved that kind of detail. And there's been studies even right down into the pigments of the skin, where skin is preserved in exceptional fossils. So really spectacular stuff. And this is a reconstruction of that Dacosaurus. So that big bone, that black bone, the limb bone, would have sat in here. And it gives you a sense of just how big these things were. You certainly wouldn't want to be bitten by that. So moving on, in addition to ichthyosaurs and crocodilomorphs, these big macro predators, there were even bigger things swimming around here. And plesiosaurs in particular are one of the things that are known from this area. Although, as I was commenting to Penny Clover just before this session started, no one seems to know much about them here in Abingdon itself, but amongst collectors, it's a very well-known locality for plesiosaurs. So plesiosaurs, think Loch Ness Monster, okay? Very long neck with paddles and so forth. But when you see the specimen and it's upstairs in the cabinet, if you want to have a look after the talk, I'll go up there and take some questions around the specimens as well. It looks amazing. I'll show you a picture of it in just a second. But I've put these dates on here just to give you a sense of what it's like to collect and reconstruct a specimen, because it took me more than 3 years to find the bones for this thing and put it all back together. And the reason for that is because the quarry workings, the bulldozers, they get down to the base of the sand and gravel, and then they shunt or dig up some of the clay and smear it up the sides of the quarry flanks. And they do that to try and seal in the spring lines. Unfortunately, the Kimmeridge clay is not a very good sealant for the spring lines, so they always fail and they have to bring in Oxford clay or some other clay to actually smooth and seal these things properly. So this skeleton had actually been bulldozed right through before I found the very first bone. And of course, I found a couple of vertebrae from the neck, and I was like, oh, this is nice. I got a few associated vertebrae. And I found a limb bone, and I didn't know that it had any association to it whatsoever. And then over time, gradually, it kept finding another bone, and that might be 3 hours of effort hunting to find one bone, just to put it in perspective. But after that effort and some spectacular preparation work by Nick Reist, who's done a lot of prep work on the material I found here, this is what I've been able to put back together. We can see it was attacked and killed by a pliosaur. from these big triangular bite marks that are in its femur here. So this was a big long-necked plesiosaur, like the Loch Ness Monster, swimming around, hunting fish, and got attacked by a big pliosaur, which came up from the depths and just bit right into its femur, gnawed away on it, probably dragged it down into the water and killed it. This specimen has subsequently been 3D scanned, and we're planning to use resin to 3D print all the missing elements of the skeleton so we can reconstruct the thing completely, which will be pretty spectacular. Working with the museum to see if there's a way which we can get that on a permanent display in the next few years. So this is what it might have looked like. Maybe a bit too well fed, but yeah, that's what happens when you use AI Copilot Microsoft to generate these images. That's how I've done all of these, by the way. They're all AI generated, but it still gives you a pretty good sense of what this animal might have looked like. Okay, and in terms of size, it was pretty big. This one actually is a juvenile, and we know that because the neural bones that sit on top of the vertebrae are not fused. So in adult specimens, those bones tend to be fused to the vertebral centra. And I do also have a partial adult specimen, which is in the process of being prepped right now. So the apex predator. This is probably the most exciting find that I've made and possibly will ever make. This is a skeleton we call Abby. It's a pliosaur, a very large individual, a macro predator that really did dominate the food chain. It could have literally killed anything and eaten anything. It has a huge skull, about nearly 2 meters, 1.8 meters in length, and some of the teeth are literally this big, and they're up in the cabinet on display, as big as T-Rex teeth, to give you a sense of it. So really a very, very dangerous predator. So this is some footage from the excavation, and you can see the bones are just scattered all over the place. We've got teeth, we've got ribs, we've got vertebrae, we've got bits of girdle bones. And actually in the site there's even sections which are faulted, so we'd be digging and following a bone and it would suddenly just disappear. We'd have to dig down another foot and find the rest of it across a microfault or something. Very difficult. It was on this hard ground surface, and the bulldozer of course had gone right through the symphysis, which is the front of the skull, probably the nicest, most important piece, and smashed it to smithereens. And it took me probably 2 or 3 months to find all the little fragments of bone, and another 2 to 3 months to then glue it all back together again, which was quite the effort, I can tell you, but well worth it in the end. So you can see some of these big teeth here, bits of skull. There's a ratchet tooth from the back of the jaw. This is actually part of the skull here. It comes from the back of the skull. And that's all been prepped and is up on the display upstairs. So yeah, the skeleton was scattered all over the place. We have one of the front limbs here. We have a femur over here, which is right next to bits of the skull, the quadrate of ramus. This is part of the post-orbital. The symphysis was somewhere around here, but I don't know exactly because it was completely smashed to pieces. And it has some interesting features, including something called a gastral basket, which is where the ribs in the belly area have actually fused, and there's a bone which connects some of the ribs together. And we even found a small ichthyosaur vertebra next to that, so nice to postulate possibly its last meal was an ichthyosaur. But it was probably quite an old individual. The skeleton is scattered everywhere, and some of it is very poorly preserved. Definitely see biodegradation on it. We also see things like The little rasping marks from gastropods and things that were feeding on the bone, and you could see where they were sat there and just sort of scraping around the algae, taking the algae off the bone and things like that. And we also collected specimens of the sediment that was around it for microfossil analysis. So you can go and see things like microsharks and things that were feeding on its carcass. Because something like this is huge, right? And it would have been a huge food source for the entire food chain when it died. So it's a work in progress. I have a PhD student at Portsmouth University studying this for his thesis. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of new science that comes out of this. It's an important specimen scientifically because it preserves both cranial, skull, and postcranial material. And that is actually incredibly unusual for Jurassic pliosaurs. Typically, we find individual elements or associated elements of the postcranial skeleton, or we find a bit of the jaw or the skull. But rarely do we find a lot of associated material. So this is what it was like. We were digging through clay. It's quite soft, not too difficult from an excavation standpoint. But we would then dig out each individual element into a slab of clay. Sometimes we cling filmed them just to keep them together, because as soon as this stuff dries out, it just completely falls to pieces. And then I spent a few thousand hours in my evenings and weekends slowly working through all these slabs of clay, extracting every individual bone and tooth and so forth. And that allowed us to get to something like this. I don't have actually a picture of the complete skeleton laid out yet. It is not complete. There are pieces missing, but probably 60–70% of the skeleton, which is quite remarkable. So you got the limb bone here with all the phalanges, the paddle bones. So this paddle would have been at least this sort of size, just to give you a sense of it. Laid out here, it's about 6 or 7 meters. This tape measure here is 2 meters, and that's just the skull, to give you a sense of it. So pretty big animal. And of course, it has generated a lot of interest from a research standpoint. So as I say, I have this thesis, this PhD student working on it, Eddie Bartlett at Portsmouth, supported by Dave Martill, Roy Smith, Judith Sassoon, just out of shot here, and Steve Etches and others. So you may have seen a BBC documentary on the pliosaur that was excavated by Steve and Chris Moore here, which happened about a year before I found this specimen, but it was under close wraps, very hush-hush, no one knew about it. But I went to visit Chris Moore, and Chris showed me this tooth from this skeleton, and he let me hold this tooth, and I was like, oh, this thing is incredibly precious. He spent a lot of hours putting it back together because it was all broken in fragments when it was first found. And I was cradling this tooth, just thinking, wow, what would it be like to find something like this? 1 week later, I found the first tooth from this specimen. So that was quite funny. So, and in the end, I actually managed to retrieve about 20 complete teeth from this specimen, which is really quite unusual. So there's a great BBC documentary, David Attenborough, that they did on this specimen. It's very similar in size and scale to the one that was collected here. And I'll just play this little clip just to give you a sense of what it might have looked like.
10 meters in length. That's about the size of a double-decker bus. They had long, broad flippers, short, strong necks, huge heads, and enormous jaws.
I'm kind of glad those things are now extinct. I wouldn't want to go swimming in the sea and find one of those. This, like I say, is from the BBC documentary. It's available on iPlayer. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth going to see or watching online. To step out of the sea, though, actually, before I do that, I meant to show you this. So this is the vertebra, cervical vertebra from the neck of a pliosaur. It's the largest one that I've found in the last 5 years. The vertebrae associated with these skeletons, both of them are about that big, the neck vertebrae. And this one is a small one. Upstairs, there are 4 associated cervical vertebrae, which in the published literature represent probably the largest ever recorded. And they're about this big. And I know in private collections from this area, there are ones this big. So how big did these things get? If the skulls on these are 2 meters and the cervical vertebrae, the neck vertebrae, only this big, imagine how big the skull would have been on one of these guys. And actually one of the biggest jaws that's been recovered came from Cumnor. It's in the Oxford Museum on the permanent display there. And that, I think, is probably the largest known jaw from one of these animals. But it had a lot of reconstructive work done on it back in the 1800s. So there's some ongoing research as part of the thesis on this specimen to also look at all these other historical specimens for comparison and to try and get a true reconstruction of what that looks like. And that involves 3D scanning or photogrammetry and building 3D models of these skulls and actually looking at which bits were preserved and then digitally reconstructing them and so forth. So massive, fearsome marine reptiles, apex predators at the top of the food chain. So out of the sea and onto land, we had dinosaurs roaming around. Now, there are several dinosaurs that have been found, or their ichnofauna, their footprints and things have been found in this area. And none of these are exactly the same age, with the exception of this one, Camptosaurus, originally called Cumnoria, which is actually a remarkably complete dinosaur skeleton, which is in the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. So certainly worth going to see that. But we do find dinosaur bones here too. But of course, they're from skeletons that have been washed down into the sea. So there tend to be individual fragmentary pieces. But up on the display, you'll see there's at least one piece of limb that's this sort of circumference from a sauropod dinosaur, most likely. And several other pieces. There's a big limb bone about this sort of size in the Oxford Museum, which was collected by Brian Beveridge a couple of decades ago, and that's now in the collection there. And there's probably a lot more to find. I've certainly heard of at least one example that was in a private collection that ended up being sold, unfortunately, of a carnivorous dinosaur with the jaw and all the germ teeth were still inside the jaw. And this collector, when he found this specimen, he was looking to purchase it. And the guy was like, yeah, you can buy it, no problem. He's like, you sure? He's like, yeah. And he got his magnifying glass out and looked, and he could just see the tips of the germ teeth in there. And he just split the jaw to expose all this row of razor-sharp teeth, the germ teeth coming through. So dinosaurs were roaming around on land, sauropods, that big dinosaur trackway you saw in the news probably recently in the last few months. And I recently found a tooth which is about this long, peg-shaped, may actually be from a sauropod dinosaur like this. It still needs some further identification, but we think that's what it potentially might be. So we know what's going on in the sea. We've got all these amazing array of fish, sharks, turtles, crocodilomorphs, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, dinosaurs roaming the land, but there are also pterosaurs flying around in the sky. Pterosaur material is incredibly rare. There is this bone, which I found. It's a bit of a funny story because I was hunting one day, and it was a day when a lot of material had been exposed. The bulldozers had been right across the clay, and there was just stuff everywhere. It was like Christmas morning for someone like me. I was just running around like picking up bones left, right, and centre. And I started finding these fragments of bone. They were completely caked in mud. And I just had a doggy doo-doo bag, and I was like, I'll just throw those bits in there. I'll wash them later. But it took me more than a year before I got round to washing this stuff. And I was in the garage late one evening, cleaning some bones and gluing them back together. And I was like, I've got a little bit of glue left. What can I glue? And I opened this bag up. I was like, oh, what the hell is this? Washed it, and I saw this part of the bone, and instantly knew that this was pterosaur. So I got madly excited, washed it all off, glued it back together, and then immediately sent some pictures to Professor David Marto at Portsmouth University, who's a world expert in pterosaurs, and said, I think this is pterosaur, but look at the size of it. And he said, easily the most important bone you've ever found. I was like, oh no, this is before the pliosaur. The reason it's a shame is because there was probably more of this specimen, but by the time I'd got round to prepping it and so forth, that part of the quarry had been completely backfilled, so it's too late to go and recover any more of it. But the original specimen is now in the Etches collection in Dorset and Kimmeridge. It's there because that is where most of the pterosaur material from the Kimmeridge clay is, in that collection. And Steve Etches has done a spectacular job finding, curating, preparing this material over the last 30, 40 years. So it's there for comparison. It is significantly larger than most other material that's been found from the British Jurassic. In fact, when we published a paper on this last year, we're pretty sure it represented the second largest Jurassic pterosaur ever found in the world. And it's certainly the largest Jurassic pterosaur found in Britain. And we did some work on estimating its wingspan. And we could do that because this bone is this first wing phalanx here. And there's a proportional relationship to the length of this bone and the total wingspan of pterosaurs, which has been proven statistically through a lot of data. So this is the potential range of estimates, with Batman for scale, of course, because why wouldn't you? So 3 to 4 meters is the kind of wingspan. So would have stretched across this entire room and beyond. A very, very large and significant flying individual with an impossible name, Tenocosmatoid, pterodactyloid pterosaur, a filter feeder probably, would have scooped up krill and stuff and eaten it. It probably was flying over the sea and clipped its wing on a wave, and that was it. Just went down. Or maybe a pliosaur just spotted it and went, who knows? We'll never know. So there's a replica of this upstairs. There's also another piece of bone which is pterosaur, and I believe is from the same specimen because it's so rare. It's highly unlikely to be from another one, which I found I had in the collection. I'd misidentified it as a piece of ichthyosaur rib. It was only once I'd seen this that I then recognized what that piece was, but that's also upstairs. So yeah, pretty exciting. We did a big press release around this, and it went all around the world and got covered quite a lot, including radio and TV and stuff. So that's my talk. If you're interested in learning more, finding out more about some of the things that I collect, I have this Instagram channel, Monster Fossils. Feel free to go in there and have a look at the many thousands of things that I've posted. There's lots and lots of fossils from here and other locations. I want to acknowledge a few people. I want to acknowledge Tuckwells, the operators of the quarry, for allowing me to collect. It is unusual to get permission to access these kinds of sites. And also Brian Webb, who is the landowner. And I do stress that You know, if you want to go, if you're inspired to go out and do some fossil hunting, you've got to get permission from the landowner, from quarry operators if you're going to go into these sites first. All my colleagues at Portsmouth and Bristol University and Leicester also that I've been able to collaborate with. When I started this, I knew nothing about Jurassic marine reptiles. I knew a bit about ichthyosaurs because I collected some ichthyosaur material in Dorset on the south coast around Lyme Regis. But I've learnt an awful lot just by doing this as a bit of fun in my spare time. I want to recognise Dan and Ellen here at the museum for supporting this event and also the displays and things. Nick Reist for the amazing prep work that he does on this material. It really does bring it to life. And several other people that have been involved and given me advice, and Jeff, who's right here in the audience. Thank you, Jeff. So happy to take questions. Hopefully you found this interesting, but what I want you to take away from this is, 150 million years ago, this whole area was an ancient seaway. The sea was teeming with life: fish, sharks, crocodiles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, all eating each other. I could show you some examples of that upstairs. Dinosaurs roaming the land, pterosaurs flying in the sky. Thank you very much.